Welcome back to another edition of Talking Ball. It's Jack, and today we're looking at Duke versus Arizona. This game will be this coming Friday at 10:30. It is at Arizona, and I think it's going to be a great basketball game. It's the second of 4 tough non-conference tests for the Blue Devils. They lost the first one versus Kentucky, and we are going to break down how they match up with Arizona today. No JD, he's on vacation, so just me. And I think this is going to be a really fun breakdown here. We've got two really good teams, two teams that in different ways are looking for a win, and I think match up pretty well against each other. And we're going to start off with the Arizona side, and then we'll get to Duke in the second half here of the video. So Arizona is 2-1 on the season. They're coached by Tommy Lloyd, and they've been running out a consistent starting lineup, although I wonder if we will see a change. Maybe not, but I am just curious of Jaden Bradley, Caleb Love, KJ Lewis, Trey Townsend, and Tobe Awaka, who are respectively 6'3", 6'4", 6'4", 6'6", and 6'8". So Duke will have a little bit of a height advantage, but in terms of size, I don't really see it. So clearly Awaka, while undersized for a center, makes up for it with being 250 pounds and just a bull inside, very strong. And while he did have some troubles scoring the ball against Steven Crowell and Wisconsin, rebounding he did just fine. And that's one of the keys I'm going to get to later on in this video. But what's been interesting to me about Arizona early on is that Caleb Love I don't know if he's struggling to find his way, but they mentioned, Noah Eagle mentioned on the broadcast that Coach Lloyd is looking for Caleb Love to be a little bit more deferential. And looking at his numbers, that is certainly something you could argue that he's tried to do. But in the matchup with Wisconsin, he gets a technical foul about 5-6 minutes into the game, comes out of the game for an extended period. When he gets back in, even before that, quite frankly, I just feel like him being deferential takes away from the positives of Caleb Love. We all know, as Duke fans, we've seen Caleb Love before. If you haven't, he's a very streaky scorer. When he has it going, he can win you a game. When he doesn't have it going, he can certainly lose your team a game. And it was interesting in the fact to me that he's never been a guy to turn down shots, and it seemed to happen, especially as the game went on with Wisconsin, that he just wasn't aggressive after trying to get himself going, forcing the issue a little bit. That's more like Caleb Love. And then even his teammates were trying to pick him up because his body language wasn't good. So the reason I bring this up is when you looked at this team on paper coming into this season, I expected Caleb Love to be the leading scorer. And that has not been the case. It's been Jaden Bradley. And he's had a really good year so far. Moving into the starting lineup with Boswell moving on to Illinois, he's had a great start to the season. And Bradley not only is a good offensive player, but a good defensive player as well. And he's not even the best defensive player on the team, which would be KJ Lewis, who is just a phenomenal wing defender, averaging, I know they've played 3 games, so this is a little bit of an asterisk, but he's averaging over a block and a steal per game. He just he's very physical at the point of attack. He can guard multiple positions. He's just a guy, he's got that dog mentality, if you will. And he's very physical on offense, can get downhill. He's been shooting more this year. Shot hasn't fallen, but looks relatively good. And I think, especially at home, there's a chance he knocks down a couple of threes for Arizona. And then the guy who's interesting to me, Trey Townsend, the last starter here that I haven't mentioned, coming over from Oakland, was the Horizon League Player of the Year. He was in the famous game with Kentucky, which Oakland won, mostly due to his teammate, Mr. Golke. But Townsend's a good player, and he's gotten off to a little bit of a slow start this year, adjusting to playing at Arizona. A little different role for him this year as well. And I wonder if this could be a game where he plays better. And I am curious how he and Cooper Flagg respectively will do in that matchup at the power forward position, because Trey Townsend is a graduate player. He is, while a little bit shorter than Cooper Flagg. He's got 20, 25 pounds on Cooper. And I think the lower center of gravity could give Cooper some issues if Townsend, like I've seen in the past, tries to back him down, get closer to the basket. That'll be something I'm curious to watch in this matchup. So overall, actually before I do that, let me round out the rest of the rotation players for Arizona. For those of you who don't know, they play about 9 players, so I'm not going to go through the entire roster. But the guys who come off the bench. So Anthony Del Orso is a transfer from Campbell. He is from Australia. He's a great shooter, a really good scorer, and hasn't got off to necessarily the hottest start. He did shoot the ball pretty well against Wisconsin, but he is a guy who can certainly get hot and could certainly, if Duke defends the three-point line the way they did against Wofford, Del Orso could score. He could hit 3-4 threes in this matchup versus Duke, because they left a lot of open shooters, and Del Orso is a knockdown shooter. Then they have their 2 7-footers. So they don't necessarily have a ton of height in the starting lineup, but it comes in off the bench. And this is another surprise for me from when I looked at Arizona coming into the season. Montigas Krivas is coming off the bench. I expected him to start the year. And the thing I was alluding to earlier is that Awaka didn't have a great first half versus Wisconsin, and Krivas started the second half, is what I believe. And so maybe that opens the door for that change to happen. I don't know if it will. I feel like Coach Lloyd would probably stick with the same starting 5, but that's a possibility to keep your eye out for, especially with Duke running Malawach out there. It'd be a good size matchup with both 7'2" players, and that is a matchup I'm very intrigued to see what happens. And then Henry Vesar is a guy who missed the entirety of last season. He comes in 7 foot, about 230, can shoot the ball, a little bit skilled, also is physical, and so he brings a different element, especially because Coach Lloyd will pair him with either Krivas or Awaka. So Arizona at times can be very big out on the court, and that will be another thing that I'm curious how Coach Shire will look to match up. Will it be, Malik Brown and Malawach, or will he stick with, Flagg and Malawach, or Flagg and Brown, right? Will he run out that smaller lineup where everyone's 6'5" to 6'8" or 6'9"? So that's another thing to look forward to. And then lastly, the talented freshman for Arizona is Carter Bryant, who he looked pretty good in the minutes I saw versus Wisconsin. I think, he certainly could play more. He's an athletic player at 6'8", 220. He's got good size, and somebody I expect to play, at least 10 to 15 minutes in this matchup versus Duke to kind of combat some of the size that Duke has. So, good defensive team. They run about 9 deep. They're not the best three-point shooting team. They've got Del Orso. They've got Bradley. Depending on the night, Love. Vesar shoots some. KJ Lewis is not a great shooter. Awaka's a non-shooter. You don't get much from Krivas out there. Townsend, not much as well. So they're kind of limited to a handful of players that Duke has to focus on. And that's, one thing to pay attention to in this game as far as will Duke guard the three-point line a little bit better. I know technically they did a great job against Wofford if you just looked at the box score, but they had a ton of open shots. So that's kind of like the synopsis as far as Arizona is concerned. A couple other details I would say from the Arizona side of things are Del Orso. So I mentioned the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, he really struggled against Wisconsin. Multiple players were able to take him off the bounce and score or draw fouls. And that is something that I'm curious if Duke will be able to take advantage of between guys like Caleb Foster, Con Knipple, coming, depending on who Del Orso is guarding, will they look to attack him? And they also played Arizona, that is, a little bit of like a token full court pressure when they were down in that game. And that's something I'm curious to see how Duke will deal with that in this matchup if Duke has the lead. Granted, they were down most of the game, so it's hard to say whether they would have done it if they had the lead, but that's just what I noticed. And can Duke deal with the physicality of players like Tobe Awaka and Trey Townsend and KJ Lewis. I think that's going to be something to watch out for, along with the big fellas in Krivas and Vesar. And lastly, I think, in terms of matchups, who does Tyrese Proctor guard? Because definitely last year and so far this year, Duke has liked to put Proctor on the best offensive player for the opposition, perimeter player, right? And so, if you would have asked me before the season started, I would have thought it would have definitely been Caleb Love. But based off how the year has started, I wonder if instead that's going to be Jaden Bradley, who has been the leader offensively early in this season for Arizona. And then on the flip side, my guess is that KJ Lewis is going to be guarding Kon Knipple. Because I think if KJ, maybe there's also a world where KJ is guarding Cooper Flagg. But I think if that happens to start the game, it just leaves a question as to who does Trey Townsend guard. So I think it's more likely that KJ Lewis guards Kon Knipple. And Kon is got to be looking for a big bounce back game in this one. Coach Shire mentioned in the post-game press conference after the Wofford matchup, that his job is to figure out how to support Cooper and how to help Kon. And as we all know at this point, Kon had a rough game versus Kentucky. He didn't look like himself the first 10 minutes, seemed to get himself into the flow, and then lost it the last 15 minutes or so. And so while I felt like he had a solid game versus Wofford, this is going to be a really big test for Kon in terms of, what type of role is he going to have as the year goes on. Maybe that's a bit dramatic, but I think you guys get what I'm saying in terms of, can he respond to the bigger moments? Because he's done well against, in the exhibitions, against Army and Maine. He played well against Wofford, didn't shoot the ball a ton, but I thought he played well. And so how will he do, and how will the rest of the freshmen do in this road environment versus Arizona? Because while, the post-game press conference again versus, not press conference, but interview after Wofford, Tyrese Proctor mentioned how the game with Kentucky, while it was a neutral site game, it felt like a road game to him. And certainly, I've been to a couple Champions Classic games. It does feel like at times a road game for Duke. But this is a true road game, and this is going to be a very tough environment. Arizona's got great fans, and it's going to be a ton of fun to watch this game and see how the freshmen respond. The one guy who I'm personally not concerned with in terms of how they respond is Cooper Flagg. I think he's proven it really early in this season that he is ready for big moments. And the only question is, how is he going to handle the late game moments, and can he make adjustments? Because the one thing we did see, even though it was a blowout with Wofford, they got him the ball at the end of the first half, and he turned it over. And that's something he's got to work on and improve upon, because it's one thing if you're missing the shots in those situations, or you're making passes to your teammate and they're not making it. I think, a lot of fans, we can live with that. But the turnovers are frustrating because you don't give yourself a chance. And that's all I think we can ask for, is just a chance in these late game scenarios. So those are a couple of things that I'm looking for. I think Cooper, he's going to play great. Does that mean he's going to score 20 plus points? Not necessarily. He could, have 14 points, 8 to 10 rebounds, 5 assists, couple steals, and a block, right? Like, he's not necessarily a guy who has to score. It's just, what does the team need from him to win that game? And so the guys who I'm more curious about are the backcourt. Foster and Proctor in different ways got off to really good starts versus Kentucky. Proctor scored the ball well early and really throughout the first half. Foster had a number of good assists early on, had a couple steals, dove for the ball. And then in the second half, both guys, didn't play well. Foster, in fairness, I felt like missed a lot of open shots, at least a couple of open shots that were in and out. So it was maybe a little bit unlucky. Proctor, he only took 2 shots, and the last game against Wofford, he was much more aggressive. And whether that's him being more aggressive, or his teammates looking to find him, or the coaching staff putting an emphasis on, we've got to find this guy, because while a lot of the attention, and rightfully so, has been on Kon as the best shooter on this team, it's actually been Proctor who shot the best percentage, and they've shot the same number, 26 attempts through the first 4 games. Proctor's at 50% from 3 early on this year. And I think it's important that they both, Proctor and Foster, get off to good starts and maintain it as the game goes on, because this is going to be a tough environment for the freshmen, and even, some of the, a Sion James, for example, although I'm not particularly worried about him. This is his first, time with Duke in this one of these kind of games. And while he does have a ton of experience, I think he will be, just fine. It is, something to keep an eye on. And speaking of Sion, how the transfer trio do, I think they've been doing a really good job this year of being a stabilizing presence for this team, and I expect that to continue. And just the only thing that I'd be looking for is, can Mason Gillis, hit a couple of threes in this game to kind of give this Duke team some momentum. He didn't knock it down against Kentucky. Didn't shoot the ball great against Wofford, so it is something I'm going to be looking for in this game. And then lastly, or I guess the last 2 ones in terms of Duke players, I think Isaiah Evans has got to get some first half minutes. And the reason why it's got to be in the first half is because if, again, Duke's offense kind of slows down as the game goes on, I just think it's really tough for somebody to sit the first half and then have to come in the second half and be a spark plug. So I think it's important that, maybe it's Darren Harris instead of Isaiah Evans, but one of those two guys has got to get 3 to 5 minutes in the first half just to see, because you don't know. Maybe they come in, they miss their first couple shots, it's not their night. Okay, Coach Shire tried it. We can all kind of live with that a little bit more. But if they don't get playing time, then the questions come up after the game because the offense kind of stagnates and we just don't have good flow. And that was the biggest difference. I know that the opponent wasn't as strong, but in the matchup with Wofford, the offensive flow was great. The ball was moving, it was hopping, no one was holding it very long, and there was just quick decisions, especially in the first half. Second half kind of slowed down a little bit, but it was a much different flow offensively. So with that being said, two keys for me in this matchup, and then we'll get out of here. So if you've liked this video so far, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. I appreciate it. It helps us grow. And let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. So the 2 keys, as far as I'm concerned, in this game are going to be the 3-point shooting. Both teams in their big tests of the year shot 4 of 23. Duke did that against Kentucky. Arizona did that against Wisconsin. I expect Arizona to shoot better since they're at home. They're more comfortable. Can Duke shoot better in a big game? That's going to be something I'm very curious about, and that's going to come from the ball movement. Can they get guys in player movement? Can they keep moving the ball around? And then on the flip side, Duke's got to guard the 3-point line better in this matchup against Arizona. Even though I know they don't have a ton of great shooters, you still got to be out there against Bradley, against Del Orso, and Caleb Love, because you never know, and he's done it several times against Duke where it's his night, and you just don't want him to get hot. And lastly, the possession battle. Can Duke limit their turnovers and force Arizona to, turn the ball over more often? Some of that, and, some of the possession battle also will come down to the rebounding battle, where, a guy like Awaka, while he didn't score the ball well against Wisconsin, he did have 13 rebounds in 20 minutes, which is kind of insane. And so Duke's going to have to do a really good job against him in particular, but it's got to be a team effort. It can't just be, Malawach versus him. Flagg has done a tremendous job rebounding the ball. The guards have helped a little bit. They've got to help maybe a little bit more in this matchup. So those are the keys for me. Duke versus Arizona. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Share it with a friend. We're growing. We're doing Duke basketball the whole year. A little bit of college basketball, and then the NBA draft as we get closer towards the end of the season. So if you're into that, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.